The alarm clock blared at 4:45 in the morning, the same unforgiving hour it had sounded every day for the past 3 years. Grace Whitmore's hand shot out from under the thin comforter and silenced it with practiced precision. For a moment, she lay motionless in the dark, listening to the familiar sounds of the old apartment building, the clanking of the radiator, Mrs. Chen's television murmuring through the wall, and the distant rumble of a delivery truck making its pre-dawn rounds. She allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of this stillness before forcing her body upright. There was no time to linger, no luxury of a slow awakening. Her first shift at the diner started at 5:30, and she needed to be dressed, ready, and out the door with enough time to scrape the ice from her windshield before the 15-minute drive down Route 22. Grace moved through her morning routine with the efficiency of someone who had shaved every unnecessary second from the process. 3 minutes in the shower. 2 minutes to dress in the same black slacks and white button-down she wore 4 days a week, the backup set reserved for the other three. Hair pulled into a tight ponytail, no makeup save for a quick swipe of chapstick. Coffee, brewed the night before, was reheated for 45 seconds in the microwave and poured into a travel mug that had seen better days. She paused at Eli's bedroom door, cracking it open just enough to see his small frame buried under the blankets. One arm was flung over his head. His dark hair, so much like his father's, spilled across the pillow. He was 11 now, old enough to get himself up and ready for school, old enough to pour his own cereal and lock the door behind him when he left. Old enough, she told herself, though the guilt still gnawed at her stomach every morning she left before he woke. The cold winter air bit through her coat as she stepped outside, her breath forming clouds in the orange glow of the single parking lot lamppost. The lot at Riverside Apartments was a patchwork of potholes and cracked asphalt. Their car, a 2008 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper and a passenger door that always stuck, waited in its usual spot under the dead oak tree. The Riverside Diner sat at the intersection of Route 22 and Old Mill Road, a relic of chrome and vinyl that had been serving the same menu since 1967. Grace had been working there for 4 years, slinging eggs and coffee for truckers, construction workers, and the occasional lost tourist who'd wandered off the interstate. The pay was $7.25 an hour plus tips, which meant that on a good week, she might clear $300. It wasn't enough, but it was steady. By 6:30, she had already refilled coffee for the same dozen regulars who occupied the counter stools, as if by divine right, taken orders from 2 truckers in the back booth, and mediated an argument between Pete, the cook, and Marlene, the other waitress, over whose turn it was to clean the grease trap. The real breakfast rush would start at 7. A chaotic 2-hour blur of scrambled eggs, toast, home fries, and the endless refrain of "coffee, hun," a phrase she repeated so often it bled into her dreams. She was wiping down table 7 when Darren Kowalski walked in, the mailman who'd had their route for as long as Grace could remember. He usually came in around 8:15 for his coffee and a corn muffin, but today he walked straight toward her with an urgency that made her stomach clench. "Grace," he said, pulling an official-looking envelope from his bag. "This came registered mail. You weren't home, so I figured I'd catch you here. You need to sign for it." She wiped her hands on her apron and took the stylus he offered, scribbling her signature on the electronic pad. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with a return address that read, "Morrison, Ketchum and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania." "Everything all right?" Darren asked, genuine concern on his weathered face. "Don't know yet," Grace said, turning the envelope over in her hands. Probably just a bill I forgot about. But it didn't feel like a bill. Bills came in thin envelopes with plastic windows. This felt important, in a way that made her heart beat a little faster. She didn't open it until her shift ended at 2 o'clock. By then her feet ached. Her lower back throbbed with the familiar pain of too many hours standing. And she'd made $63 in tips, which she'd already mentally allocated to Eli's upcoming field trip and the electric bill. She sat in her car in the parking lot, the heater blasting lukewarm air, and carefully tore open the seal. The letterhead was embossed, formal. She scanned past the legalese. We regret to inform you of the passing of Louisa Margaret Hartwell. Until the words finally registered. Her great-aunt Louisa had died. She'd passed away 3 months ago, in October, at the age of 94, and Grace was her sole living heir. Grace stared at the letter, trying to recall anything at all about Louisa Hartwell. She had a vague memory of an old woman at her grandmother's funeral, when Grace had been maybe 7 or 8. A tall, severe figure in black, who stood apart from the other mourners, silent and stern. Her mother had whispered something about Great-Aunt Louisa, how she'd gotten strange after the war, how she lived alone in that big old house up in the hills and didn't speak to the family anymore. That had been more than 20 years ago. Grace hadn't thought of her since. According to the letter, a reading of the will would take place on Friday the 18th at 10 in the morning at the law offices in Pittsburgh. Her presence was required. The estate consisted of real property located at 1879 Blackidge Hollow Road, Summit County, Pennsylvania, including all structures and contents therein. Grace read the letter 3 times, then dialed the number at the bottom. A receptionist with a crisp, professional voice answered, "Morrison, Ketchum and Associates." "Hello, my name is Grace Whitmore. I just received a letter regarding an inheritance from Louisa Hartwell." "One moment, please." Tinny classical music played, making Grace feel out of place even over the phone. Then an older man's voice came on the line, his diction careful, like someone used to being listened to. "Ms. Whitmore, this is Gerald Morrison. Thank you for calling. I handled your great-aunt's affairs for the last 30 years. I'm sure this news has come as quite a surprise." "I barely remember her," Grace admitted. "And I don't understand why she would leave anything to me. We never spoke. I didn't even know she was still alive." "Your great-aunt was very specific in her instructions," Morrison said. "She followed your life from a distance, Ms. Whitmore. She knew about your son, about your circumstances. She wanted the property to go to someone who would appreciate its value, not just its price. Someone strong enough to see beyond the obvious." A chill ran down Grace's spine that had nothing to do with the car's inadequate heating. "What does that mean?" "It means the property is quite unique," Morrison said carefully. "It's been in your family for 4 generations. The main house was built in 1883 by your great-great-grandfather, Silas Hartwell. It's substantial, roughly 6,000 square feet, stone construction, situated on 17 acres in the hills above Summit Valley. But I must be frank with you, Ms. Whitmore. The property has been vacant for 5 years, ever since your aunt moved into an assisted living facility. It requires considerable work. The roof likely needs replacing, the plumbing is antiquated, and there has been no regular upkeep since 2019. "So it's worthless," Grace said flatly. "I didn't say that," Morrison replied. "What I am saying is that its value is not immediately apparent. Your great-aunt believed you would understand the difference. She was quite insistent on that point." After she hung up, Grace sat in the parking lot for another 10 minutes, staring at nothing. Then she drove to her second job at the stop-and-go gas station and convenience store, where she worked the register from 3 to 11, 4 nights a week. The owner, a perpetually anxious man named Rajesh, let her bring books and study for her GED when it was slow, which was most of the time. She didn't tell anyone about the letter that day. Not Marlene or Pete at the diner. Not Rajesh. Not even Eli. When she got home at 11:30 and found him asleep, his history homework half finished on the kitchen table, she tucked the letter into her nightstand drawer and tried to sleep, but her mind kept returning to that one phrase. Someone strong enough to see beyond the obvious. The scoffing started 3 days later, after the news got out. Small towns have their ways, and somehow, by Wednesday morning, everyone seemed to have heard that Grace Whitmore had inherited the old Hartwell place on Blackage Hollow. "You better check for ghosts before you move in, kid," Marlene said during the Thursday breakfast shift, her tone half joking, but with an edge that made it clear she thought Grace was a fool for even considering it. "My grandma used to clean for old lady Hartwell back in the 60s. Said that house had a bad feeling. She quit after 2 months. Wouldn't say why. Probably worth less than the back taxes," Carl Camper, one of the regulars, added without looking up from his newspaper. "Those old places, they bleed you dry. Taxes, repairs, heating bills. You'd be smarter to let the county take it." Rajesh was more practical, but just as discouraging. "Grace, you are a sensible person. Why would you want a house that has been empty for 5 years? Empty houses are money pits, and it is so far from everything. How would you get to work?" Even her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, weighed in when they met by the mailboxes. "That place is cursed, you know," she said matter-of-factly, adjusting her grocery bags. "Since the war, people died there. It's not good to stir up those old houses." "What people?" Grace asked. But Mrs. Chen just shook her head and scurried away as if she'd already said too much. By Friday, Grace was almost ready to call Morrison and tell him to donate the property to the county or sell it for whatever he could get. Almost. But something kept nagging at her. That phrase about seeing beyond the obvious. The fact that her great-aunt had specifically chosen her had followed her life from a distance. There was an intention there, and Grace had learned the hard way that intention mattered. So on Saturday morning, she packed Eli into the car with sandwiches, 2 thermoses of coffee, and a tool bag from the apartment maintenance closet that she technically wasn't supposed to borrow. The drive to Blackage Hollow Road took 90 minutes, winding north through Summit County into increasingly remote hill country. The paved road gave way to gravel, then to a rutted dirt track that made the Civic's suspension groan. "Are we lost?" Eli asked, looking up from his phone for the first time in an hour. "I don't think so," Grace said, though she wasn't entirely sure. The GPS had lost its signal 20 minutes ago, and they were navigating by a hand-drawn map the law office had faxed to the stop-and-go. "Just over the next rise," it said. The trees closed in around them, an old-growth forest whose bare branches created a tangled lattice against the gray November sky. Then the road curved, and suddenly, there it was. The house rose up on the hillside like something from another century. Because it was. Grace stopped the car at the end of the long, overgrown drive and just stared. It was enormous. 3 stories of dark, weathered stone with a steep slate roof and chimneys at either end. The windows, at least 20 of them visible from this angle, were tall and narrow, many of them shattered, gaping like empty eye sockets. Wild ivy had consumed the eastern wall, creeping all the way to the second floor. The grounds were a chaotic wilderness. What might have once been formal gardens were now a tangle of dead weeds and saplings. But there was also something undeniably majestic about it. The stonework was incredible. Hand-cut blocks fitted together with such precision that even after nearly 140 years, the walls stood straight and true. The proportions were elegant, despite the decay, and the steep pitch of the roof gave it a Gothic air that was both intimidating and strangely beautiful. "Whoa," Eli breathed. "It's like a castle." "It's like a horror movie," Grace muttered, but she was already opening her door. They walked up the drive together, their footsteps crunching on gravel and fallen leaves. As they drew closer, Grace could make out more details. Elaborate arabesques above the windows, a heavy oak door with iron hinges fit for a medieval dungeon, and carved into the stone lintel above the entrance, a coat of arms with a Latin phrase, Fortis in fide. "What does that mean?" Eli asked. "Strong in faith," Grace said, surprising herself. She'd taken 2 years of Latin in high school, one of the few classes she'd genuinely enjoyed. Morrison had sent the keys, enormous pieces of iron that looked like props from a period drama. The front door resisted at first, its wood swollen with damp and disuse, but finally gave way with a groan that echoed through the interior. The entrance hall was dim, light filtering through grimy windows to land in dusty shafts on the dark wooden floor. A grand staircase swept up to the second floor, its banister carved with more of those elaborate arabesques. To the right, a set of double doors stood ajar, revealing what must have been a formal sitting room. To the left, another door led to what looked like a library, its floor-to-ceiling shelves still filled with books. Everything was coated in the dust and debris of abandonment. Dead leaves had blown in through broken panes, water stains marred the walls, and the musty smell of decay hung heavy in the air. But beneath it all, Grace could see the bones of something extraordinary. The crown molding was intact. The floors were solid hardwood, scuffed but not rotten. The windows, though broken, were original wavy glass. And everywhere she looked, there were details that spoke of a craftsmanship that no longer existed. Hand-carved corbels, brass fittings green with patina, tiles in the entryway forming an intricate geometric pattern. "Mom, look at this," Eli called from the library. She found him in front of a massive desk, pulling open drawers. "There's stuff in here, old stuff." Grace went to him, peering over his shoulder. The drawer was filled with papers, some loose, others in folders, many yellowed and brittle with age. She carefully lifted out a bundle of letters tied with a string. The top envelope bore an address in faded ink. Miss Louisa Hartwell, Black Ridge Hollow. The postmark was dated 1943. With trembling fingers, Grace untied the string and unfolded the first letter. The paper crackled at her touch. The handwriting was elegant, precise. "My dearest Louisa, I write to you from my post in London, where the work continues at full pace. I trust the project is proceeding as planned in Blackridge. Did the materials arrive as scheduled? Yes, Father would be proud of what you are doing. Remember his words, gold entrusted to protect futures, not fortunes. What we preserve now may mean survival for those who come after. The cellar refuge must be secured before winter. Time is running out, and I fear what the new year may bring." The letter continued, but Grace's hands were shaking too much to read clearly. She placed it carefully on the desk and picked up another. This one was dated 1945. "Louisa, Your last telegram alarmed me greatly. You must not attempt to enter the lower chambers alone. The structural concerns you mention require a professional assessment. I know Father designed them to withstand anything, but it has been 60 years since the construction. Promise me you will wait until I am home? What is it? Eli asked. I'm not sure, Grace said honestly. Letters to your great-great-aunt about some kind of project during World War II. There were dozens of them, dated from 1942 to 1946. Grace gathered them carefully and placed them on the desk, making a mental note to read them properly later, with better light and time to process. They spent the next 2 hours exploring. The house was even larger than it looked from the outside. 6 bedrooms upstairs, plus a nursery, and what must have been the servants' quarters. A formal dining room that could seat 20, and a conservatory on the south side, its glass dome mostly intact but clouded with filth. Everywhere, there were signs of a life interrupted, furniture draped in dust cloths, pictures still hanging on the walls, dishes in the kitchen cupboards, as if Louisa had simply walked out one day and never returned. The kitchen was in the worst shape. The roof had leaked, or perhaps a pipe had burst, and the ceiling sagged dangerously over the old cast-iron stove. The floor was warped in places. The water-damaged boards buckled and discolored. Grace was testing a section with her foot, trying to determine if it was stable, when Eli called from the entrance hall. "Mom, I think I found a cellar door." She left the kitchen to find him crouched by the staircase, pulling back a moldy rug to reveal a trap door, flush with the floor. It had an iron ring for a handle, green with age. "Should we open it?" Eli asked, his eyes bright with the kind of excitement only an 11-year-old can have for potentially dangerous discoveries. Grace hesitated. It was already past 3, and the November sun was setting fast. They should leave, come back with better flashlights, maybe someone who knew about old houses and structural integrity. But curiosity won. She pulled on the iron ring, and with a shriek of hinges that hadn't moved in years, the trapdoor swung open. A draft of cold air rose from below, carrying the scent of earth and stone. Grace took out her phone and switched on the flashlight, aiming it into the darkness. Stone steps led down into what looked like a wine cellar. "Stay here," she told Eli, but immediately reconsidered. She didn't want to leave him alone up here, but she didn't want to take him into an unstable cellar either. "Actually, no. We'll both go, but you stay right behind me. And if I say move, you move fast. Got it?" He nodded, and together they descended into the underbelly of the Hartwell house. The cellar was vast. The stone walls were solid, despite their age. The wine racks were indeed full of bottles cloaked in decades of dust, their labels illegible. But Grace barely noticed them, because her flashlight had caught something else. A doorway at the far end of the cellar, carved from the bedrock itself, with an iron gate standing open. Beyond it, more darkness, and the sound of water, a distant trickling, like a stream running somewhere deeper underground. They moved toward the doorway. Beyond it was a corridor. The walls were now natural rock, not cut blocks. At the end of that corridor, the beam of Grace's flashlight spilled out into a larger space, a chamber of some kind. "Mom, maybe we shouldn't," Eli began. But Grace was already moving forward, drawn by something she couldn't name. The chamber was circular, perhaps 20 feet across, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into the shadows above their heads. In the center, set into the floor, was a well or some kind of shaft, surrounded by an iron grate. Grace approached it cautiously and pointed her flashlight down. The shaft was deep, water glinting far below, but it was what surrounded the shaft that made her catch her breath. The floor was inlaid with metal, not just any metal, but what looked like copper or bronze, worked into an elaborate pattern of concentric circles and strange symbols that reminded her of the coat of arms above the front door. "What is this place?" Eli whispered. Before Grace could answer, a sound came from above them. A deep, resonant rumble like thunder, but closer, more sustained. The ground trembled. Dust rained down from the ceiling. "Get out!" Grace grabbed Eli's hand and ran back through the corridor, up through the cellar, and scrambled up the stone steps. The shaking continued, growing stronger. Something in the house groaned. Wood or stone, strained beyond its limits. They burst into the entrance hall just as another rumble shook the walls. Grace pulled Eli toward the front door, but stopped when she heard a sound from the kitchen. A crack like a gunshot, followed by a crash that made the whole house shudder. They ran to the kitchen doorway and stared. The sagging section of the floor had given way completely, collapsing into the space below. Rain now poured through the damaged roof and wind howled through the new opening. But it wasn't that which made Grace's heart stop. In the beam of her phone's flashlight, glinting from the hole in the floor, was the unmistakable shine of metal. Not pipes, not wiring, something else, something gold. And beneath it, echoing up from the hollow chamber that had just been revealed, came the sound of running water, louder now, more insistent, as if something had been opened. "Mom?" Eli's voice was small, frightened. "What's down there?" Grace stood at the edge of the collapsed floor, the flashlight beam trembling as she tried to peer into the darkness below. The thunder rolled again through the hills, closer now, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall through the broken ceiling. She thought of the letters, of the words written 80 years ago. The Cellar Refuge Project. Gold entrusted to protect futures, not fortunes. The lower chambers. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I think we're about to find out." The rain fell with growing fury as Grace and Eli stood on the edge of the collapsed kitchen floor, staring into the darkness below. Water streamed through the damaged ceiling, creating a curtain of cold droplets that soaked them in seconds. A flash of lightning lit up the room in stark white relief. And in that brief moment, Grace saw it clearly. The unmistakable gleam of something metallic, something golden, resting in the hollow chamber beneath what had been the kitchen floor. "We have to go," Eli said, his teeth chattering. "Mom, should we leave?" He was right. It was nearly 4:30. The storm was intensifying, and they were in a structurally compromised house miles from any help. Every rational part of Grace's brain was screaming at her to grab her son, run to the car, and drive away from whatever secrets this place held. But she couldn't move. Her eyes were fixed on that golden glint, on the dark opening that had been hidden beneath floorboards and tiles for decades. The letters from Louisa's desk flashed through her mind. The Cellar Refuge Project. Gold entrusted to protect futures, not fortunes. The lower chambers must be secured before winter. "Just 5 minutes," Grace heard herself say. "Let me just get a look. You stay right here by the door where it's safe." 5 more minutes, I promise." She edged closer to the hole, testing each floorboard before putting her weight on it. The opening was about 6 feet across, jagged where the boards had splintered and fallen away. The beam of her phone's flashlight swept the space below, and gradually her eyes began to make sense of what she was seeing. It wasn't a simple crawl space or storage area. The chamber below had height, at least 10 feet from floor to ceiling. And there, almost hidden among the rubble of broken boards and old tiles, was the top of what looked like a spiral staircase. Not wood, but metal, iron or steel, dark with age but still solid. Grace knelt at the edge of the hole, her heart pounding. The staircase descended in a tight spiral, disappearing into shadows beyond the reach of her light. And snagged on one of the steps, gleaming in her flashlight beam, was what had first caught her eye. A rectangular bar, about the size of a brick, made of what could only be gold. Her hands trembled as she leaned down, stretching as far as she could without losing her balance. Her fingers brushed the bar, found purchase, and lifted. It was shockingly heavy. She almost dropped it from the unexpected weight. She pulled it up and set it on the intact floor beside her, then sat back on her heels, breathing hard. The bar was tarnished, caked with decades of dirt and damp, but it was unmistakable. Each face was stamped with inscriptions, numbers, letters, and symbols she didn't immediately recognize. She rubbed a thumb across the surface, revealing brilliant yellow metal beneath the dullness. Is it real? Eli had crept closer, his fear momentarily overcome by curiosity. I think so, Grace whispered. She turned the bar over, revealing more engraved markings, U.S. Mint, and a date, 1942. Below that, a weight designation in troy ounces. Grace had no idea what gold was worth, but she knew it was measured in thousands of dollars per ounce. And if there was one bar down there, she stood up abruptly, a decision crystallizing in her mind. I'm going down there. What? No way, Eli protested. Eli, look at this. She held the bar out to him. This is real gold, military gold from World War II. And it was just sitting there on the stairs. That means there could be more. We have to at least look. It's not safe. I know, you're right. That's why you're going to wait in the entryway, where the ceiling is solid and the floor isn't compromised. Take the car keys. She pressed them into his hand. If something happens, if you hear anything wrong, you run to the car and you drive away. Do you understand? I don't know how to drive. You've seen me do it 1,000 times. Put the key in the ignition, turn it, shift into reverse. Press the accelerator. You don't have to go fast or far. Just get away from the house. Can you do that? He looked at her, his young face pale in the flashlight's beam. Then he nodded. Grace gave him a quick, hard hug. 5 minutes. I'm just going to take a look and I'll be right back. She carefully lowered herself through the hole, her foot finding the top step of the spiral staircase. The metal was solid, showing no give or rust as she put her weight on it. She descended slowly, one hand on the central column of the spiral and her phone in the other, lighting each step before trusting it. The staircase descended 15 feet through what had clearly been a later addition to the original foundation. The walls here were poured concrete, not the fieldstone of the house's cellar. At the bottom, Grace found herself in a corridor that stretched in 2 directions. To her left, the passage seemed to lead back toward the front of the house. To her right, it continued into darkness. She chose right, moving slowly, her senses on high alert. The corridor was perhaps 7 feet high and 4 feet wide. The walls and ceiling were reinforced with steel I-beams, set into the concrete at regular intervals. Electrical wiring ran along the ceiling, ancient, cloth-wrapped cables that likely hadn't carried a current in 70 years. Along the walls, Evenly spaced brackets must have once held lanterns or lights. After about 30 feet, the corridor opened into a larger chamber. Grace paused at the threshold, her light sweeping across a space that made her catch her breath. It was a shelter, not a simple cellar or storage room, but a true subterranean refuge designed to sustain human life. The room was perhaps 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, with an 8-foot ceiling. Along both long walls were metal-framed bunk beds, stacked 3 high, at least 20 of them in total. Between the bunks, wooden crates were piled shoulder high, many of them bearing stenciled military designations: sea rations, potable water, medical supplies. At the far end of the room stood a massive steel door, the kind Grace had seen in photos of bank vaults, with a wheel and spoke locking mechanism at its center. Next to that door, mounted on the wall, was a framed document under glass. Grace crossed the room, stepping around debris and the skeletal remains of what must have been rats or other creatures that had found their way down here over the decades. The document was yellowed with age but still legible, typed on official-looking letterhead. Office of Strategic Services, Special Projects Division. The text was dense with bureaucratic language, but certain phrases leaped out at her. Designated Historical Asset Alpha 7. Secure storage of national monetary reserves in the event of Axis invasion. Property owner bound to absolute secrecy under penalty of treason. Operational designation: Hearthstone. Grace's mind reeled. Operation Hearthstone. The phrase from Luisa's letters. This wasn't just a private shelter built by a wealthy family during the war. It was a government installation, sanctioned and supplied by U.S. intelligence, designed to protect something valuable enough to warrant this level of secrecy and construction. She turned to the vault door. The lock was enormous, meant to be operated by 2 people under normal circumstances. Grace gripped it with both hands and heaved. Nothing. She braced her feet and tried again, putting her full weight into it. The wheel groaned, moved a few inches, and then seized up. Frustrated, she turned her attention back to the crates. Most were nailed shut, but one near the bunks had a lid that was askew. Grace carefully pried it up, her flashlight revealing the contents. Gold bars, stacked in neat rows, each one identical to the one she had found on the stairs. She did a quick count. 50 bars in this crate alone. Her hands were shaking again as she moved to another crate. This lid came off more easily, revealing not gold, but papers, documents sealed in waxed canvas pouches, remarkably well preserved. She opened one pouch and found accounting ledgers. The pages were filled with entries dated 1943. Each entry listed numbers, weights, serial numbers, and, she realized, location coordinates, scattered across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. Operation Hearthstone wasn't confined to this single location. There were multiple sites, multiple properties used to hide parts of the National Gold Reserve, and this house, her great-aunt's house, was one of them. Grace's 5 minutes stretched to 20. She forced herself back up the spiral staircase, up into the ruined kitchen where Eli was waiting anxiously by the door. "Did you find anything?" he asked. Grace looked at him, at his young face so full of trust and concern, and she made a decision. Some burdens were not for children to carry. "Not yet, just an old shelter," she said. "World War II stuff. Nothing dangerous." The lie tasted bitter, but it was a necessary one. They drove home in silence, the storm lashing at the Civic as they navigated the pockmarked roads back toward civilization. Grace's mind was racing, trying to process what she had found, what it meant, and what on earth she was supposed to do next. The gold bar was in her coat pocket, its weight a constant reminder that everything had changed. By the time they reached their apartment parking lot in Riverside, it was after 7. Eli was asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted by the day's events. Grace carried him upstairs. He was getting too big for this, almost too heavy, but she managed, and put him to bed still in his damp clothes. He barely stirred. She made coffee she didn't want, and sat at the kitchen table with the gold bar in front of her and her laptop open. Research consumed the next 3 hours. She learned that gold prices had soared to over $2,400 an ounce, that a standard gold bar contained 400 troy ounces, and that Operation Hearthstone, as far as the internet was concerned, did not officially exist. But there were whispers, on history forums, conspiracy theory sites, and in obscure academic papers about wartime gold movements. One site, maintained by a local historian named Dr. Philip Brennan, caught her eye. His specialty was World War II-era Pennsylvania, particularly the region's industrial and strategic importance. She found his email address and composed a carefully worded message. Dr. Brennan, I am researching my family's property in Summit County and have come across evidence of wartime military activity, possibly related to covert operations in the 1940s. Would you be willing to discuss this matter? Grace Whitmore. She hit send at 11:15, knowing it was far too late for a response but unable to wait any longer. Then she hid the gold bar in the apartment's only air conditioning vent. A paranoid precaution that felt absurd even as she did it, and finally allowed herself to sleep. Monday morning at the diner, Grace moved through her shift in a daze. Her mind kept returning to the vault door, the crates of gold, and the implications of what she had found. She was so distracted she poured coffee into a customer's water glass and delivered the wrong order to table 5, twice. Kid, where's your head today? Marlene asked during the mid-morning lull. You sick or something? Just tired, Grace said. But Marlene's knowing look suggested she didn't buy it. It was Carl Kemper who broke her resolve. He came in at his usual 10:30 and ordered his usual breakfast. 2 eggs over easy, bacon, and whole wheat toast. And then as Grace refilled his coffee, he said, So you go out to that spooky old house? Find any treasure in those old walls? He said it as a joke. His tone was light, teasing, the way you rib someone over a foolish decision. But something inside Grace snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or the weight of the secret she was carrying, or just the accumulated frustration of years of being dismissed and second-guessed by people who thought they knew better. Actually, I did, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I found a World War II shelter under the kitchen with military supplies and documents. Carl's expression shifted from amusement to skepticism. A shelter? Like a bomb shelter? More than that. It's huge. Steel reinforced. Bunks for dozens of people. Crates of supplies. And it's connected to some kind of government program from the war. By now, Marlene had drifted over, along with Pete from the kitchen and 2 other customers from the counter. Grace could feel their attention on her, and she could see the disbelief forming on their faces. Let me get this straight, Pete said slowly. You're saying your great-aunt's tumble-down house has a secret military base under it? It's not a base, it's a shelter. And it's real. I was in it. I saw the documents. Documents, Carl repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. Sure, official military documents just lying around in some old lady's basement. It's not in the basement. It's under the kitchen. Honey, Marlene cut in, her voice gentle but full of pity. I think maybe you've been working too hard. This whole inheritance thing has got you stressed, and now you're seeing things. That old house is probably just full of junk and old furniture, and your imagination is running wild. I'm not imagining it, Grace insisted. But even as she spoke, she could tell she'd lost them. Their expressions ranged from amusement to concern to outright mockery. What's next? Pete smirked. You gonna tell us you found Fort Knox down there? Maybe the Ark of the Covenant? A ripple of laughter went through the group. Grace felt her face burn with shame and anger. Forget it, she muttered. Forget I said anything. She retreated to the kitchen, humiliation and rage warring in her chest. She had been an idiot to say anything, to think these people would ever believe her or take her seriously. She was Grace Whitmore, the single mom working 2 jobs who could barely make rent. What right did she have to claim she'd found a secret government installation? The shift ended at 2, but Grace stayed in the back doing busy work until the lunch crowd had thinned and she could leave without running into any of the people who had overheard her story. She was gathering her things when she felt a hand on her arm. She turned to see an elderly gentleman behind her, someone she vaguely recognized as an occasional customer, but whose name she didn't know. He was in his 80s at least, with the upright posture of a former military man, and eyes that were sharp despite his age. You were the one talking about the Hartwell place? He asked quietly. About finding something underneath it? Grace hesitated, then nodded. The man glanced around, making sure they were alone. When he spoke again, his voice was barely more than a whisper. What exactly did you find? There was something in his tone. It wasn't mockery or disbelief, but a genuine, bordering on fearful concern that made Grace answer honestly. A subterranean shelter, steel reinforced, crates with military markings, documents from 1943, referencing something called Operation Hearthstone. The color drained from the man's face so fast, Grace thought he might collapse. He gripped the counter for support, his knuckles turning white. Sir, are you okay? Should I call someone? No, he said sharply. Then more gently. No, I'm fine. But you need to listen to me very carefully, young lady. If you found what I think you found, you don't tell anyone. Not your friends, not your family, not a soul. Do you understand? I don't understand any of this, Grace said. What is Operation Hearthstone? What was my great-aunt involved in? The old man looked at her for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with something inside. Finally, he said, My name is Robert Cavanaugh. I was an Army engineer during the war, from 42 to 45. And in the summer of 1943, I was part of a team that did some very unusual construction work in the hills of Summit County. We were sworn to secrecy, signed papers, the whole 9 yards. We were told, if we ever spoke of what we built, it would be considered treason. What did you build? Vaults, he said simply. Vaults hidden on private properties. Properties whose owners could be trusted, who understood what was at stake. The war wasn't going well in 43. There was a genuine fear that the Nazis could develop long-range bombers, that they could strike the U.S. mainland. The government decided it needed to disperse critical assets, gold from Fort Knox, important documents, things that couldn't fall into enemy hands if Washington or Kentucky got hit. Grace's heart hammered in her chest. How much gold? I don't know. They didn't tell us anything we didn't need to know to do the job. But the vaults we built were substantial. We're not talking about a few bars. We're talking enough weight that we had to reinforce foundations, install specialized ventilation, create drainage systems, millions of dollars worth, even at 1943 prices. And nobody ever came to get it? In 80 years? Kavanaugh's expression darkened. The program was classified at the highest levels. After the war ended, after the threat passed, I always assumed they quietly retrieved everything, sealed the sites, and made the whole program vanish from the records. But if what you're telling me is true, if there's still an intact vault under Hartwell Place, he trailed off, shaking his head. It means either the government forgot about it, which seems impossible, or there's some reason they couldn't or wouldn't retrieve it. What reason? I don't know. Maybe the paperwork was lost. Maybe the people who knew about it died, and the knowledge went with them. Maybe it became more valuable to pretend it didn't exist than to try and recover it. But here's what I do know. If word gets out that you've found an intact cache from Operation Hearthstone, every treasure hunter, conspiracy theorist, and crooked official in the country will be crawling all over that property, and some of them won't ask nicely. Grace felt a chill, despite the diner kitchen's warmth. What should I do? Get a lawyer, a good one, someone who specializes in property law and government contracts. Find out where you stand legally if that gold is technically abandoned property, whether you have a claim, whether the government can just show up and take it. And in the meantime, you don't tell another soul what you found. The people who laughed at you today did you a favor. The crazier people think you are, the safer you'll be. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a time-yellowed business card. This is my nephew. He's a lawyer in Pittsburgh. Tell him Uncle Bob sent you, and he'll take your case seriously. And Grace? He fixed her with an intense gaze. Lock your doors. Pay attention to who's around you. This is the kind of thing that changes lives, and not always for the better. Grace took the card with trembling fingers. Robert Kavanaugh gave a single sharp nod. Then he shuffled toward the door, moving like a man who had just been forced to remember things he'd spent decades trying to forget. The rest of Monday passed in a blur. Grace called the number on Kavanaugh's card and left a halting voicemail for his nephew, James Kavanaugh, Esquire. She went to her shift at the Stop and Go and spent 6 hours mechanically scanning items and making change, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. When her shift ended at 11, she drove home through streets slick with rain. Another storm was moving in, less violent than Saturday's, but steady and cold. She thought about what Kavanaugh had said, about lawyers and lawsuits and the need for secrecy, which is why she didn't notice anything wrong until she was pulling into the parking lot. There were tire tracks in the sand near her parking spot. Fresh ones, the kind left by a vehicle with wide, heavy-tread tires, not the kind of car that belonged at a place like the Riverside Apartments. Grace slowed, her pulse quickening. The tracks went past her spot and continued alongside the building toward the storage units and dumpsters. Someone had been here recently. Someone who had taken the trouble to drive into an area where there was no reason to go. Grace parked and sat for a moment, trying to convince herself she was being paranoid. The tracks probably belonged to a maintenance vehicle or someone's pickup truck, or any number of innocent explanations. But Kavanaugh's warning echoed in her head. Lock your doors. Pay attention to who's around you. She got out of the car and climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, keys clutched in her hand. Everything seemed normal. The hallway was quiet. The fluorescent lights flickered with their usual hum. Mrs. Chen's television murmured behind her door. Then Grace reached her own apartment and stopped short. The door was ajar, not wide open, but definitely not shut. The deadbolt was slack where it should have been engaged. Grace's first thought was of Eli. Panic seized her. She'd left him with Mrs. Chen for the night. But what if he'd come home early? What if someone had broken in while he was here? She pushed the door open, her phone already in her hand. 911 keyed in but not yet sent. Eli? She called out. Are you here? Silence. Then, down the hall, Mrs. Chen's door opened. The elderly woman appeared, and behind her, blessedly, wonderfully, was Eli, safe and holding a bowl of popcorn. Grace, is everything all right? My door, Grace managed to say. It was open. Was anyone here? Mrs. Chen frowned. I don't think so. I've been home all evening. I picked Eli up from school like you asked, and we've been watching movies. It's been quiet. Grace had Eli stay with Mrs. Chen and forced herself into the apartment. Her heart hammered as she went from room to room, flipping on every light, checking every closet and corner. Nothing seemed disturbed. Nothing looked stolen. The TV was still there. Her laptop was where she'd left it on the kitchen table, and Eli's tablet was on his bed. Even the cash she kept in the coffee can, $43 for emergencies, was untouched. But someone had been here. She was sure of it. There was a feeling in the air, a sense of violation that had nothing to do with missing objects. And when she went to check the air conditioning vent, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unscrew the cover. The gold bar was gone. Grace sat down hard on the floor, her back against the wall, trying to process what this meant. Someone knew somehow, despite her caution, despite telling no one except the people in the diner who had laughed at her. Someone knew what she'd found, and they had come looking for proof. She thought of the tire tracks, of the careful way her apartment had been searched. Nothing disturbed, nothing taken except the one thing that mattered. This wasn't a common thief or a random break-in. This was someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Robert Kavanaugh's words came back to her. If word gets out, every treasure hunter, conspiracy theorist, and crooked official in the country will be crawling all over that property. It had taken less than 12 hours. Grace picked up her phone and looked at the business card Kavanaugh had given her. She needed help, someone who could navigate the legal complexities of what she had uncovered. But more than that, she needed to understand what she was really dealing with, what her great-aunt Louisa had been protecting all those years, and why someone was willing to break into her home to find it. She dialed the number again, and this time, when the voicemail picked up, her message was urgent. Mr. Kavanaugh, this is Grace Whitmore. Your uncle gave me your number. I need to speak with you as soon as possible. It's about a property I inherited, and something I found there. Something related to World War II. Someone broke into my apartment tonight. They're looking for it. Please call me back. She hung up and sat in the silence of her violated home, listening to the rain and thinking about vault doors and gold bars and secrets that had waited 80 years to surface. Part of her wanted to just walk away, to pretend she'd never been to that house, never descended into those chambers, never learned of Operation Hearthstone. But another part of her, the part that had gotten her through poverty, single motherhood, and endless double shifts, knew that walking away wasn't an option. Whatever this was, whatever her great-aunt had been guarding, was hers now. Her inheritance, her responsibility, and somewhere out in the rainy Pennsylvania night, someone was watching, waiting, and planning their next move to take it from her. Grace didn't sleep that night. She sat on the sofa with a baseball bat across her lap, an absurd protection against whatever forces were now interested in her property. But it made her feel slightly less powerless. Eli slept in her bed, his small body curled under the covers, blessedly unaware of how drastically their lives had shifted in the span of 72 hours. At 6 a.m., her phone rang. She snatched it before it could wake Eli. "Hello? Miss Whitmore? This is James Kavanaugh. I received your message. My uncle also called me late last night. He's quite concerned about you." Grace almost wept with relief at hearing a voice that wasn't mocking or dismissive. "Thank you for calling back. I don't know where to begin. Uncle Bob gave me the basics. Why don't you tell me exactly what you've discovered, and we'll go from there." She told him everything. The inheritance, the letters, the collapse of the kitchen floor, the spiral staircase leading down into the shelter, the crates of gold, the documents mentioning Operation Hearthstone. She told him about the single bar she'd taken, and how it had been stolen from her apartment just hours after she'd mentioned her discovery at the diner. Kavanaugh listened without interruption, and when she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "All right, Miss Whitmore. I need to be very clear with you about the situation you're in. If what you've described is accurate, you have uncovered what is almost certainly still legally classified material. The gold, if it is indeed Treasury property from 1943, does not automatically become yours just because it's on your land." Grace's heart sank. "So the government can just take it?" "It's complicated. The gold was placed there under a wartime emergency program. Whether that constitutes abandonment after 80 years, whether your great-aunt's cooperation in the program created any sort of ownership right, whether the classification itself is still valid, these are questions without clear answers. What I can tell you is that you need documentation. You need to document everything you've found before anyone else gets to it. Photographs, video, a detailed inventory if you can manage it. And you need professional witnesses, people whose testimony will hold up if this ends up in court or in front of a federal hearing." "I can't go back there alone," Grace said. "After last night, I'm afraid someone might be watching the property." "Then don't go alone. Is there anyone you trust? Someone with a background in construction or engineering who could help you access the vault safely and document what's inside?" Grace immediately thought of Tom Brenner. He'd graduated high school 2 years ahead of her, one of those quietly competent guys who had joined the National Guard after graduation, served 2 tours in Afghanistan, then come home and started a small construction company. She'd run into him occasionally over the years. He'd helped her fix a leaking pipe in her apartment once, refusing payment. Just said it was nice to help a neighbor. "I have someone in mind," she said. "I think he can help." "Good. Get him to the site today if you can. Document everything. And Miss Whitmore, don't trust anyone claiming to be from the government without seeing credentials and verifying them independently. You call me immediately if anyone approaches you with official-sounding demands. We need to control how this information gets out, or you'll lose any leverage you might have." After the call ended, Grace sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she looked up Tom Brenner's number. His company, Brenner Construction, had a website with a local phone number, and she dialed it before she could back out. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Brenner Construction. Tom? It's Grace Whitmore. We went to school together. I live over at Riverside Apartments. You helped me with a plumbing issue a while back? Grace? Yeah, sure, I remember. Is everything okay? It's. I know it's early. I need some help with something. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but I didn't know who else to call. The words came out in a rush. I inherited my great aunt's property out on Black Ridge Hollow Road, and I found something underneath the house. Something big. I need someone with construction experience to help me access it safely and document what's there. And I need someone I can trust, because I think there are people who want to take it from me. There was a pause. Then Tom said, "Does this have anything to do with what people were talking about at the diner yesterday? About you finding some kind of bunker?" Grace's stomach tightened. Of course. Word had gotten out. In a town this small, gossip moved faster than light. Yes. But Tom, I'm not crazy. What I found is real, and it's important. Someone broke into my apartment last night looking for proof. I need help. Another pause, longer this time. Give me an hour to get my gear together. I'll meet you at the property. Text me the address, he said. Thank you, Grace sighed, relief washing over her. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. If you've really found something worth breaking and entering for, we could be in for more than we can handle. Grace arranged for Mrs. Chen to watch Eli again, claiming there was more work to be done at the property, repairs that needed assessing, nothing out of the ordinary. Mrs. Chen readily agreed, pleased to have the company. Then Grace packed the car with everything she thought they might need: flashlights, a phone charger, and an extra battery pack, bottles of water, and the letters from Louisa's desk, tucked safely inside a waterproof folder. The drive to Blackhead Hollow felt shorter this time, though no less desolate. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, clear November morning. When she pulled up to the house, she found Tom's truck already there, a heavy-duty Ford with equipment racks and his company logo on the door. He was standing on the front steps, studying the building's facade with a professional eye. He turned at the sound of her car, and Grace was struck again by how much he had changed from the scrawny teenager she'd known. The military and years of physical labor had filled him out, leaving him with a solid, capable presence. His dark hair was shorter now, dusted with gray at the temples, and his eyes held the kind of weariness that comes from seeing difficult things. "Morning," he said, as she approached. "Quite a place you've inherited. This is Hartwell property. I didn't even know any of them were still alive. My great-aunt Louisa. She died in October. I barely knew her." "And you found something down there?" His tone was carefully neutral, not quite believing, but not dismissing her either. "Come inside," she said. "I'll show you." She led him through the entry hall and into the kitchen, where the hole in the floor gaped like a mouth. The rain had made it worse. Water pooled on the remaining tiles, and the exposed edges of the collapsed section looked even more unstable than they had on Saturday. Tom let out a low whistle. "Okay, that's not what I was expecting. This isn't just a collapsed floor. It's a hidden access point. Look how the boards were reinforced at the edges, how they're hinged here. This was designed to open. The collapse just forced its hand." He unclipped a powerful flashlight from his belt and aimed it into the opening, illuminating the spiral staircase below. That's steel construction, military grade by the looks of it. "It's about 15 feet down to the first level," Grace explained. "There's a shelter down there. Bunks, supplies, crates. And beyond that, there's a vault door I couldn't open. That's what I need help with." Tom looked at her, his expression serious. "Grace, before we go down there, I need to know what we're dealing with. You said people are after this. What exactly did you find? She took a deep breath and told him everything. About the gold bar, about Operation Hearthstone, about Robert Kavanaugh's warning, and the break-in at her apartment. She showed him the letters from Luisa's desk, watching his face as he read the faded words about gold entrusted to protect the future. When she finished, Tom was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "My unit did some work in Iraq, securing supply lines and convoys. We heard rumors about caches from the first Gulf War, weapons and money that were buried in the desert and never recovered. The military isn't perfect at keeping track of things, especially in wartime. If this Operation Hearthstone was classified enough, if the people who knew about it died, or the records got lost in bureaucratic shuffles, yeah, I can see how something like this could stay hidden for 80 years. So, believe me when I say, I believe you found something worth documenting. If it is what we think it is, we'll find out," he continued. "But Grace, if this is real, if there's actually government gold down there, we need to do this the right way. Document everything. Establish a clear chain of custody, protect ourselves legally. I served my country, and I respect the law. We are not looters." "I don't want to steal anything," Grace said quickly. "I just want to know what my great-aunt was protecting, and what my rights are. The lawyer I spoke to said I need documentation and witnesses, so let's get you both." Tom went back to his truck and returned with a professional video camera, a digital camera, measuring equipment, and what looked like climbing gear. "We're going to film everything, take measurements, catalog what we find. If this goes to court or gets investigated, you'll have proof of what was here and that we didn't disturb anything improperly." They descended into the shelter together, Tom's camera recording every step. He was methodical, pausing to film the reinforced walls, the steel beams, the crates stacked along the bunks. He read military designations aloud for the camera's audio, documenting serial numbers and dates. When they reached the vault door, he set the camera on a tripod and examined the mechanism carefully. This is a Mosler vault door, 1940s model. They built these things to withstand just about anything. The wheel mechanism is seized, but the real question is whether it's actually locked or just stuck. If it's locked, we need the combination, and I'm guessing that died with whoever installed this. "Can we open it?" Tom took out a can of penetrating oil and began applying it to the joints of the wheel mechanism. "Maybe. These old locks? Sometimes the tumblers seize up from disuse. If we're lucky, it's just stuck, and we can work it loose. If we're not, we're going to need a torch, and that's going to take time and make a lot of noise." He worked for 20 minutes, applying oil and letting it soak in, then carefully testing the wheel. On his fourth try, something deep inside the mechanism gave a metallic groan and shifted slightly. "There we go," Tom said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "It's moving. Help me with this." Together they gripped the wheel and pulled. It resisted, then slowly, reluctantly, began to turn. One complete revolution, then two, then three. On the fourth turn, something inside the door made a heavy thunk, and the wheel spun freely. "That's it," Tom said. "The bolts are retracted. Now we just have to hope the hinges aren't rusted solid." He braced his feet and heaved on the door handle. Nothing. He adjusted his grip and tried again, throwing his weight into it. The door groaned, shifted a few inches, and then, once it broke the seal, swung outward with surprising smoothness. Cold air rushed out, and with it, the smell of stone and metal and something else, something that made Grace think of banks and safes. Tom raised his camera and aimed its light into the vault. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of wooden crates. They were smaller than the ones in the outer shelter, but far more numerous, lining the walls on metal shelves stacked 4 high, stretching back at least 20 feet into the gloom. Each crate bore official stenciled markings: U.S. Mint, Fort Knox, dates ranging from 1942 to 1944, and serial numbers. Grace felt her knees go weak. She had known, intellectually, what they might find, but seeing it was different. This was real. This was actually happening. Tom moved slowly into the vault, his camera recording it all. He approached the nearest crate and carefully pried at the lid. It came away easily, the nails loosened by decades of subtle temperature shifts. Inside, nestled in straw and oilcloth, lay bars of gold. Not one or two, but dozens arranged in precise rows. He lifted one out, his movements careful, reverent. The bar was rectangular, about 7 inches long, 3 wide and 2 thick. The gold caught the camera light and seemed to glow from within. Stamped on its surface were the words, United States Assay, a serial number, the date 9 to 8/43, and a weight of 400 troy ounces. 400, Tom said softly, his voice captured by the camera's microphone. That's about 25 at current market, roughly $1 million a bar. He set it down gently and moved to another crate, then another. Each held the same cargo, perfectly preserved bars of gold, each bearing official markings that left no doubt as to their origin or legitimacy. "How many crates are there?" Grace whispered. Tom did a quick count, his flashlight sweeping across the shelves. "I count 234. If each one holds the same number of bars as the ones we've opened." He paused, doing the mental math. "If we assume 20 bars per crate, and each bar is worth roughly $1 million, we're talking just shy of $5 billion. The number was so large it became meaningless. Grace couldn't process it. $5 billion hidden under her great-aunt's kitchen for 80 years. "Wait," Tom said suddenly. He had moved to a small desk at the back of the vault, where a ledger book lay open, as if someone had just been working in it. He picked it up carefully and began to read, his expression growing more serious with every page. "This is an inventory log," he said. "It's dated 1943 to 1945. It lists every crate brought in here, every bar deposited." He paused, his finger tracing a column. "Grace, according to this, the total value isn't $5 billion. They aren't all 400-ounce bars. Some of these crates hold smaller denominations, coins, even processed jewelry that was melted down and recast during the war effort. The total value listed here, based on 1943 gold prices of $35 an ounce, is $234 million. At today's prices of about $2,400 an ounce." He looked up, his eyes wide. "That's roughly $16 billion. The vault suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Grace leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. $16 billion. It was impossible. It was insane. It was real. "There's more," Tom said, turning the pages of the ledger. "Notes, explanations. Listen to this. Final deposit received 7/4/1945. European theater winding down. Operation Hearthstone to remain sealed, pending Treasury directive. All documentation regarding dispersal sites to be destroyed, per OSS protocol. LMH to remain as sole civilian custodian, with instructions to secure WONK contents until official retrieval or national emergency." "LMH," Grace said, the pieces clicking into place. "Louisa Margaret Hartwell, my great-aunt." She wasn't just guarding this stuff, Grace, Tom said. She was the custodian. She was responsible for it. And according to this, she was supposed to wait for official retrieval or a national emergency. But no one ever came for it, Grace said. Why didn't they come? Tom flipped through more pages and stopped at an entry near the end. Here, June 1945, it says, encoded transmission received. War concluded European theater, Pacific theater ongoing. Treasury reports Fort Knox Reserve stabilized. Operation Hearthstone classified indefinite, pending post-war review. And then, nothing. There are no more entries. They forgot about it, Grace said slowly. Or they decided to leave it hidden. Either way, my great-aunt was left waiting for orders that never came. Tom set the ledger down gently. We need to record all of this. The ledger, the crates, every bar we can document. And then we need to figure out who to contact. Because, Grace, this isn't just valuable. It's historically significant. It's proof of a secret wartime operation. Government assets that were never accounted for after the war ended. This could rewrite the understanding of how the U.S. managed its gold reserves during World War II. They spent the next 3 hours documenting everything. Tom filmed and photographed every crate, opening a representative sample to verify the contents. He measured the dimensions of the vault and carefully recorded every page of the ledger. Grace took notes, her handwriting growing shakier as the full magnitude of their discovery settled over her. It was nearly 2 in the afternoon when they finally climbed back up into the main house. Exhausted and awestruck, Tom transferred all the video files to Grace's laptop and made backups on 2 separate thumb drives, handing one to her. Keep this somewhere safe, he said. Somewhere that isn't your apartment. And Grace, I was serious about doing this the right way. That gold either belongs to the American people, or it belongs to you by legitimate inheritance, or there's some complicated legal middle ground. But we are not thieves. We document, we report through the proper channels, and we protect your rights in the process. Grace nodded, though a part of her mind was screaming at her to fill the car with as many bars as it could hold and disappear forever. She could pay off every debt, give Eli a life she'd never dreamed possible, never work another double shift as long as she lived. The temptation was physical, a weight in her chest. But then she thought of the careful words in Louise's letters. Gold entrusted to safeguard futures, not fortunes. Her great-aunt had lived 80 years with that secret, had died without claiming a single ounce for herself. She had understood something Grace was only now beginning to grasp, that some responsibilities were more important than personal gain. They were loading Tom's equipment into his pickup when Grace noticed the vehicle. It was parked on the road, about 100 yards from the property entrance. A dark sedan, tinted windows, engine off. Just sitting there. Tom, she said quietly, that car, how long has it been there? He followed her gaze, his body language shifting instantly, a quiet coil of alertness. It wasn't there when I arrived this morning. Could be someone who broke down, or someone watching the property. As if in response to being noticed, the sedan's engine rumbled to life. But instead of driving away, it turned onto the gravel drive and approached the house slowly. Grace felt her heart hammer against her ribs. Get behind me, Tom said in a low voice, his hand moving toward his hip, where Grace realized with a jolt he was carrying a concealed firearm. Let me do the talking. The sedan stopped about 30 feet away. 2 men got out, both wearing dark, expensive-looking suits, but the kind worn by the government. The anonymous professional attire that could belong to federal agents, corporate lawyers, or private security. The one from the driver's side was in his 40s, with short hair and a build that suggested regular gym time. His companion was older, perhaps in his 50s, with graying temples and the comfortable posture of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Good afternoon," the older man said, his voice friendly, but with an undercurrent that made Grace's skin crawl. "Sorry for the intrusion. We're from the regional survey office. We're doing updated property assessments in this area for the county. Are you the owner?" "I am," Grace said, staying behind Tom as instructed. "Grace Whitmore. I inherited this property from my great-aunt." "Ah, yes. The Hartwell estate. You have quite a piece of history here. I'm David Morrison, and this is my colleague, James Reed." Neither man made a move to show identification. "We've been trying to contact you about a potential easement issue. Might we come up and discuss it?" "What kind of easement issue?" Tom asked, his tone carefully neutral. Morrison smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, there are some concerns about subterranean utilities in this area. Possibly old infrastructure that needs to be evaluated. We'd just like to do a brief inspection of the property, including any cellar or basement. It would only take a few minutes." A chill went through Grace despite the afternoon sun. These men were not from any survey office. The timing was too convenient. Their interest in underground spaces, too specific. "I'm sorry," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "But I'll need to see identification and have my attorney present before I allow any inspections. This property is part of an active estate settlement, and I have legal obligations to preserve it as is." Morrison's smile tightened. "Ms. Whitmore, I understand your caution, but this is a routine matter. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have to resort to more formal channels, which could complicate your inheritance claim." "Then get on with it," Tom said flatly. The lady said no. "Have a good day, gentlemen." For a moment, the scene held them frozen. Grace and Tom on the steps, the two men standing by their sedan, tension crackling in the space between them. Then the younger man, Reed, made a small motion, adjusting his jacket, and Grace saw the distinct outline of a firearm in a shoulder holster. But more than that, as his coat shifted, she glimpsed what looked like a suppressor attached to the barrel. Tom saw it too. His hand moved a fraction of an inch closer to his own weapon. "We will be in touch," Morrison said finally, his voice stripped of all pretense of friendliness. "Ms. Whitmore, I would strongly advise you to consider the implications of your situation. Some things are best left alone, for everyone's safety." He and Reed got back into their sedan and drove away, slowly, deliberately, as if they wanted Grace and Tom to understand they were neither scared nor in a hurry. When they were finally out of sight, Grace's legs gave out. She sank heavily onto the steps, trembling. "Those weren't government surveyors," Tom said, his voice tight. "The weapon Reed was carrying, a suppressed pistol, that's not standard issue for any legitimate federal agency doing property assessments. Those were private contractors, or something worse." "How did they know?" Grace whispered. "How did they find out so fast?" "Someone at the diner could have mentioned it to the wrong person. Or they could have been monitoring police frequencies, looking for reports of a break-in or unusual activity at this address. Hell, they may have had the property under surveillance since your great-aunt died, waiting to see if anyone would claim the inheritance." He pulled out his cell phone. "We need to call that lawyer and get you and Eli somewhere safe." Grace thought of her son, innocently watching television with Mrs. Chen, unaware his mother had just stepped into something dangerous. "I need to get him right now." "I agree. But Grace, you can't go back to your apartment. If they found this place, they know where you live." "Then where do we go?" Grace asked, her voice cracking. Tom was silent for a moment, thinking. My place. It's out past Summit Ridge, about 40 minutes from the city. It's a small cabin, but it's secure. I had it built with reinforced doors and a good security system after my second tour. You and Eli can stay there while we figure this out. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering, Grace. I signed up to protect people. That didn't end when I left the service. And this, he gestured to the house, to the hidden vault beneath it. This is important. This is history. If people are trying to steal it or silence it, then someone needs to stand up for what's right. Grace felt tears sting her eyes. Thank you. They drove back to the city in a convoy, Tom's truck in the lead, Grace following behind, her eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror for dark sedans. She called James Cavanaugh from the road, bringing him up to speed on everything they had found and the encounter with Morrison and Reed. Do not go back to your apartment for anything but essentials, Cavanaugh said immediately. And when you do, have your friend go in with you. These people are operating outside legal channels, which means they're either criminals or working for someone who considers this valuable enough to break the law. I'm going to make some calls, reach out to some contacts. I know a federal historian who specializes in Wabubabu operations, particularly the OSS and its Black Book programs. If anyone can help us understand what Operation Hearthstone really was and what your legal standing is, it's her. How long will that take? Give me 24 hours. In the meantime, stay off the grid as much as you can. Don't use credit cards. Don't post on social media. Don't tell anyone where you're staying. And Grace, that documentation you and Tom created is your insurance policy. Make sure copies exist in multiple locations. If something happens to you, that evidence needs to survive. The words, "if something happens to you," sent a shiver down Grace's spine. They picked up Eli from Mrs. Chen's with a minimal explanation. A family emergency. They needed to stay with a friend for a few days. Could she forward any mail? Mrs. Chen agreed readily, though her expression suggested she knew something serious was afoot. Grace threw clothes and essentials into trash bags, grabbed Eli's schoolwork and his tablet, and they were gone in less than 15 minutes. Tom's cabin was exactly as Grace had pictured. A small, tidy ranch house on a 2-acre wooded lot, with solar panels on the roof and a sense of self-sufficiency in every detail. He settled them in the guest room, showed Eli where the games and books were, and made sandwiches while Grace tried to process everything that had happened in the last 8 hours. That night, after Eli was asleep and Grace and Tom were sitting at the kitchen table with coffee neither of them was drinking, she asked the question that had been haunting her all day. Why? She said. Why would anyone leave that much gold hidden for 80 years? Why not just retrieve it after the war was over? Tom was quiet for a long moment. I've been thinking about that. What if it wasn't forgotten? What if it was intentional? Think about it. Operation Hearthstone was classified at the highest levels. The people who knew about it, who knew where the caches were, would have been intelligence officers, treasury officials, maybe a few high-ranking military. What if, after the war, they looked at the economic situation, looked at all the changes happening, and decided it was safer to leave the gold hidden than to try and consolidate it back into Fort Knox? Safer how? The Cold War was just starting. Nuclear weapons were in play. Fort Knox became a target. If the Soviets could destroy or seize the National Gold Reserve, they could bring down the U.S. economy. But if significant portions of that reserve were distributed in secret caches, caches that officially no longer existed, then, even if Fort Knox fell, the country would still have resources. It's like an insurance policy. Distributed redundancy. The fact that the records were destroyed, that the program was erased from official history, that wasn't incompetence. It was intentional operational security. Grace felt her understanding shift. So my great aunt, she wasn't just forgotten. She was trusted. They left her as a guardian because they knew she would keep the secret. And she did, until the day she died. The question is, what do we do now that the secret is out? Before she could answer her own question, her cell phone vibrated. A text from James Kavanaugh. Just spoke with Dr. Elena Martinez, federal historian specializing in OSS ops. She's willing to meet you tomorrow at 10 a.m. at her office in D.C. This is urgent. She's heard rumors of Hearthstone for years, but could never find proof it existed. Your discovery could be historically crucial. She can also advise on the legal status of the find. Sending her contact info. Be careful. Grace showed the text to Tom. Washington, D.C.? That's a 6-hour drive. We leave at 3 in the morning, Tom said without hesitation. We'll get there by 9 with time to spare. Eli comes with us. I don't want him out of our sight right now. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, reviewing the documentation they had created, and trying to ignore the gnawing fear that somewhere out there, Morrison, Reed, and whoever they worked for were making plans of their own. Grace finally fell into a restless sleep around midnight, Eli breathing softly in the bed beside her. She dreamed of vault doors, of gold bars, and of her great-aunt Louisa, a stark figure in dark clothes, standing in a subterranean chamber, waiting patiently for orders that would never come. She woke to the sound of shattering glass. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was or what had woken her. Then she heard it again, the sharp crack of a window breaking somewhere in the front of the house, followed by footsteps, several pairs of them, moving quickly but trying to be quiet. Grace rolled out of bed, her heart pounding. She shook Eli awake, pressing a hand over his mouth before he could speak. Shh, she whispered urgently. Don't make a sound. Someone's in the house. His eyes widened in terror, but he nodded. Grace grabbed their clothes from the chair where she'd left them and pulled Eli toward the bedroom door. She eased it open a crack, peering into the dark hallway. Tom's bedroom door was already open. She could see his silhouette moving in the gloom, dressed and holding his service pistol, his phone pressed to his ear. He gestured toward the back of the house and to what she remembered was a rear door leading out into the woods. But before they could move, a voice called out from the front room. Morrison's voice. Ms. Whitmore, we know you're in there. Tom Brenner's truck is in the drive. This doesn't have to end badly. We just want to talk about what you've found, about how to handle this situation in everyone's best interest. Grace looked at Tom. His expression was grim. He held up 3 fingers, indicating 3 intruders, then pointed emphatically again toward the back door. If you cooperate, Morrison continued, his voice getting closer, we can make sure you are compensated fairly. You've had some hard years. I understand. Single mother, working 2 jobs, struggling to make rent. We can change that. We can ensure your son has opportunities you never did. All you have to do is sign some papers, agree to remain silent about what you've found, and walk away. They were in the kitchen now. Grace could hear the floorboards creak. Any second they would start checking the rooms. She grabbed Eli's hand and moved as silently as possible toward the back of the house, following Tom's lead. He eased the back door open. He must have kept it well oiled. And they slipped out into the cold November night. The forest behind the house loomed dark and menacing, but it offered cover. Grace pulled Eli close and ran. A shout erupted behind them. They had been discovered. Beams of light from flashlights sliced through the darkness, searching. Tom led them deeper into the woods, moving with the confidence of someone who knew the land intimately. Grace stumbled over roots and rocks. Eli's hand clutched in hers, both of them trying desperately to remain silent. "There!" someone yelled behind them. The flashlight beams converged, closing in. Tom stopped at what looked like a pile of dead branches. He swept them aside, revealing a small cellar door set into the hillside. "In," he whispered urgently. "It's an old storm shelter. Leads to a tunnel that comes out half a mile from here. Go." Grace didn't question it. She pulled the door open and pushed Eli into the blackness, following immediately. Tom was the last one in, pulling the door shut and bolting it from the inside. Just as the flashlight beams swept over the spot where they had been, they huddled in the darkness, breathing hard, listening. Footsteps crunched overhead. Voices murmured. Then, mercifully, the sounds receded, moving deeper into the woods. Tom flicked on a small LED flashlight he'd grabbed from somewhere, revealing a tight space with concrete walls and a narrow tunnel leading into the gloom. "This was here when I bought the property," he whispered. "It's an old bootlegger's tunnel from the Prohibition era. I reinforced it and kept it in good repair, just in case. Never thought I'd actually need it." "Where does it lead?" Grace asked, her voice trembling. "It comes out in an old barn on my neighbor's property. From there, it's a quarter-mile walk to the main road. My truck is at the house, but I have a motorcycle stashed in the barn. It'll get the three of us to the highway." "And then where?" Grace pressed. "They won't stop, Tom. They broke into your house. They're chasing us through the woods. Whoever these people are, they're serious." Tom's expression was grim in the flashlight's glow. "So, we don't run. We go to Washington as planned, but we don't wait until morning. We go now. Tonight. We meet with Dr. Martinez. We hand over all the documentation, and we make this public. Once it's public, once there are official witnesses and media attention, they can't make it disappear. They can't make us disappear." Grace thought of Eli, terrified and confused, caught up in something he didn't understand. She thought of the $16 billion in gold sitting beneath her great-aunt's kitchen. Enough money to solve every problem she'd ever had. She thought of Morrison's offer, compensation, opportunities, a comfortable life in exchange for silence. And she thought of Louisa's words, written 80 years ago. Gold entrusted to protect futures, not fortunes. Her great-aunt had understood what Grace was only now beginning to grasp. This wasn't about personal wealth. It was about the truth, about history, about the principle that some things were too important to be buried and forgotten, no matter how convenient that might be for powerful people. "All right," Grace said, pulling Eli close. "We go to Washington. We tell the truth, all of it." Tom nodded. "Then let's move. They'll search the house and realize we're not there. We'll have maybe an hour's head start before they figure out we found another way out." They moved down the tunnel, Eli between the two adults, heading toward whatever waited for them on the other side. Behind them, in the house above, armed men with a singular purpose were sweeping through the empty rooms, searching for secrets worth killing for. Somewhere ahead, in a city built on secrets and power, a historian was waiting to hear about an operation that had been erased from history and a vault of gold that was never meant to be found. The tunnel stretched on in the darkness. Grace kept walking. She kept moving forward, because that's what her great-aunt would have done. It's what you did when the future depended on it. You protected what mattered, no matter the cost. The tunnel was cold and damp, the walls pressing in on either side as they moved single file through the blackness. Tom led the way with the LED flashlight. Grace followed, Eli's hand tight in hers, and behind them, the darkness stretched back to the storm shelter entrance and the men hunting them. They had been walking for maybe 10 minutes when Grace heard it, a distant sound echoing down the tunnel behind them. Voices. The scrape and bang of the storm cellar door being forced open. "They found it," she whispered. Tom stopped, his jaw tight. "Faster. The tunnel narrows up ahead, which will slow them down, but we need to get to the barn." They picked up the pace, nearly running through the confined space. Eli stumbled, and Grace caught him, pulling him along. The tunnel began to slope upward, and Grace could feel her lungs burning, her legs aching with the strain and adrenaline. Then Tom stopped abruptly. "Wait, listen!" Grace froze, straining her ears. Behind them, the voices were getting closer, but there was something else. A mechanical hum, faint but growing louder. It seemed to be coming from somewhere in the walls around them. "Tom, what is that?" Grace asked. Tom swept his flashlight along the tunnel walls. And that's when Grace saw it. An old junction box mounted at chest height, caked in rust and cobwebs. Next to it, half hidden behind a wooden support beam, was what looked like an ancient generator, the kind that might have been installed during the Prohibition era to power lights or ventilation in the tunnel. "Can you make that work?" Tom asked, following her gaze. Grace moved closer, her mind racing. She'd spent years fixing broken appliances in her apartment, improvising solutions when she couldn't afford proper repairs. She'd learned to see how mechanical systems fit together, how to breathe life into equipment that should have been dead. This generator was old, probably decades past its prime, but the principles would be the same. She pried open the junction box. Inside was a mess of corroded wires and ancient switches, but beneath the decay, she could see the basic structure. A manual crank starter, a fuel line that likely ran to a tank somewhere nearby, and, most importantly, what looked like a pneumatic control system connected to something deeper in the tunnel. "What are you thinking?" Tom asked, adding his flashlight beam to hers. "This junction box controls more than just the lights," Grace said, tracing the wires with her finger. "See these pneumatic lines? They're connected to something mechanical, maybe blast doors or gates that can seal off sections of the tunnel." Behind them, beams of light appeared in the darkness. Morrison's voice echoed through the confined space. "Miss Whitmore, you're only making this harder on yourself. There's nowhere to go. The tunnel ends at an old barn that's already being watched by my people. Come back now, and we can still resolve this peacefully." Grace's hands moved faster, prying at the corroded housing to access the generator's start mechanism. The fuel gauge read empty, but when she tapped it, she heard liquid slosh inside. The gauge was broken, not the tank. "Eli, honey, I need you to cover your ears and close your eyes," she said. "This is going to be loud." She found the manual crank, a heavy iron lever that folded out from the side of the generator. Tom put away his weapon and grabbed it with her, and together they began to turn. The mechanism fought them, frozen with rust and disuse. But gradually it began to move. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th rotation, the generator coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. The sound was deafening in the confined space, drowning out everything else. Dim bulbs mounted along the tunnel ceiling flickered and sparked to life, casting everything in a weak yellow glow. Somewhere behind them, Grace heard a new sound. The grinding of metal on stone. The pneumatic hiss of pressure being released. She turned and saw it. A heavy steel gate was descending from the ceiling about 20 feet back, dropping into grooves in the floor. The barrier slammed shut with a boom that shook dust from the tunnel roof, sealing the section behind them. Through the gate's narrow bars, she could see Morrison and his men, their flashlights illuminating enraged faces. Morrison grabbed the bars and pulled, testing them, but they didn't budge. These barriers had been designed to withstand raids and explosions. A few armed men weren't going to force them open. "You've just made a very serious mistake," Morrison shouted over the generator's din. "You can't hide from this, Miss Whitmore. You can't hide from what you've found." Grace felt a surge of defiant satisfaction. "I'm not trying to hide," she called back. "I'm trying to protect it. There's a difference." She grabbed Eli's hand and followed Tom deeper into the tunnel, leaving Morrison and his men trapped on the other side of the steel barrier. The generator's roar faded behind them as they moved, replaced by their own ragged breathing and the sound of their footsteps on the stone. The tunnel ended at a wooden ladder leading up to a trapdoor. Tom went up first, tested the door, and pushed it open. The cold night air rushed in, and Grace had never been so grateful for the smell of fresh air and freedom. They emerged into an old barn, just as Tom had described. Moonlight filtered through the gaps in the walls, illuminating hay bales and old farm equipment. And there, covered by a tarp, was Tom's motorcycle, a heavy-duty touring bike that looked capable of covering long distances. Tom pulled out his phone. "No signal. We need to get to the main road before I can make any calls." He uncovered the bike and began checking it over with practiced efficiency. "Grace, there's a helmet in that storage box. Eli can ride between us. It's got a harness system that will keep him secure." While Tom worked, Grace went to the barn window and looked out toward the road. In the distance, she could see headlights from at least 2 vehicles, parked and waiting. Morrison hadn't been bluffing about having the barn watched. "Tom, they're out there, on the road." He joined her at the window, sizing up the situation. "Okay, plan B. There's a fire road that cuts through the woods, parallel to the main highway. It's rough, but the bike can handle it. It will bring us out about 5 miles north, near the state highway. From there, we can head toward DC and bypass the town." "Will they follow us?" "Probably. But once we're on the state highway, there are cameras, other traffic. It'll be harder for them to make a move, and by then, I'll have made the calls we need to make." Grace helped strap Eli onto the bike. The boy's small body was wedged between her and Tom, the harness system holding him securely in place. He was terrified but trying to be brave, and Grace's heart ached for him. This was supposed to be about giving him a better life, not dragging him through midnight escapes and threats from armed men. Tom started the bike. The engine was quieter than she'd expected, clearly modified for stealth. They rolled out of the barn and into the woods, following what was barely a path, more like a suggestion of where a road had once been. Branches scraped at them. Roots threatened to snag the tires, but Tom rode with the skill of someone who knew this land intimately. After 20 minutes of careful riding, they reached the state highway. Tom pulled into a gas station, the only business still open at 2:30 in the morning. While Grace took Eli inside to use the restroom and get hot drinks, Tom stood outside making calls. When Grace returned, Tom's expression was a mixture of relief and resolve. "I got through to Robert Kavanaugh. He's calling his nephew James right now, the federal marshals he worked with, and a journalist he knows at the Washington Post, someone who specializes in government accountability stories. He's setting up a meeting for us at the Post's office, 7 a.m. James will meet us there with a full legal team. Can we make it? It's 6 hours to DC." If we leave now, we'll get there with an hour to spare. But Grace, once we walk into that building, once we start talking to reporters and federal marshals, there's no going back. Your life will change. Eli's life will change. Are you sure this is what you want? Grace looked down at her son, who was sipping hot chocolate and trying not to fall asleep on his feet. She thought of the vault beneath Louisa's kitchen, of the $16 billion in gold that had lain hidden for 80 years. She thought of Morrison and his men, people powerful enough to operate outside the law, desperate enough to break into homes and hunt people through the woods. And she thought of her great-aunt, who had kept a secret for decades, waiting for orders that never came, dying without ever claiming anything for herself. Because she understood that some things were more important than personal gain. I'm sure, Grace said. Let's finish what Louisa started. They traveled through the night, the motorcycle devouring miles of dark highway. Eli, too exhausted to stay awake despite his fear, slept between them. Grace held him close, watching the landscape shift from Pennsylvania into Maryland, and then the gradual approach of the District of Columbia. The sun was rising behind them when they finally stopped in front of the Washington Post building, a modern structure of glass and steel in the heart of the city. Robert Kavanaugh was waiting outside with 3 other people. James Kavanaugh, in an elegant suit. A woman in her 50s whom Grace assumed was Dr. Helena Martinez, and a younger man with a press badge and a digital recorder. Grace Whitmore, Robert Kavanaugh said, shaking her hand firmly. You've had quite a night. James has been on the phone with the feds. They're already preparing warrants for the men who broke into Tom's house. And this is Marcus Shen, an investigative reporter. He's agreed to hear your story and verify your documentation before we take everything to the authorities. They filed into a conference room, and Grace began to speak. She told them everything. The inheritance, the letters, the discovery of the shelter and the safe, the documentation she and Tom had created, the raid on her apartment, the confrontation at the Blackwood property, and the midnight escape through the tunnels. She showed them the videos and photographs, the copies of Louisa's ledgers, the proof of Operation Hearthstone. Dr. Martinez examined the documents with the intensity of someone who had been chasing shadows for years and had finally found substance. This is extraordinary, she whispered. I've been researching covert OSS operations for 20 years. I knew Hearthstone existed. There were too many gaps in the gold movement records from 43 to 45. Too many unexplained transfers. But I could never find proof. The operation was so completely scrubbed from the official record that most historians dismissed it as a conspiracy theory. But it was real, Grace said. It was real, Martinez confirmed, and historically crucial. Do you understand what this represents? During World War II, the government faced a genuine existential threat. If the Nazis had developed long-range bombers, if they had managed to strike Fort Knox or Washington, D.C., the entire economic foundation of the war effort could have collapsed. Operation Hearthstone was an insurance policy, distributed reserves that could sustain the nation even if the central repository was destroyed. It was a brilliant strategy, and your great-aunt was a part of it. Marcus Shen was typing rapidly on his laptop. Suddenly, she stopped as a powerful wave of pressure seized her abdomen, stealing her breath. Marcus glanced at his watch. That's 1. Let's time them. He worked methodically, transforming a corner of the cabin into a delivery area. Clean sheets on the bed, medical instruments sterilized in boiling water, makeshift stirrups fashioned from clean rope and pillows. Every movement was efficient, with no wasted energy, no hint of panic. Sarah watched him through waves of growing discomfort. You've really done this before? Twice in Afghanistan, once in South Sudan. He positioned lanterns for the best illumination. Not ideal conditions, but we'll manage. Another contraction hit her harder than the first. Sarah breathed through it, using the techniques from her birthing classes. Marcus noted the time. 12 minutes since the last one. Still early, he said, arranging pillows to support her back. First babies usually take their time. Try to rest between them. Conserve your strength. What about those men outside? Marcus's expression hardened for a moment. That was now a secondary concern. This cabin has been standing for 40 years. It's solid construction. The entrance is defensible. His clinical assessment was strangely reassuring. Sarah nodded, then winced as another contraction began to build. 8 minutes, Marcus noted, surprised. Things were moving faster than expected. He went to the stove and returned with a cup of herbal tea. Red raspberry leaf. It helps with labor. Sarah accepted it gratefully. You just have that lying around? It's good for a number of medicinal purposes. A faint smile touched his lips. Though I'll admit, obstetric supplies weren't my priority when I scouted this place. The next few hours passed in a blur of escalating contractions. Before Sarah's eyes, Marcus transformed. The gruff recluse was replaced by a focused, competent physician. He checked her progress regularly, his clinical detachment making the intimate exams less awkward than they might have been. 6 centimeters, he reported. Good progress. By evening, the contractions were coming every 3 minutes. Sarah gripped the edge of the bed, sweat matting her hair. I don't know if I can do this. You're already doing it. Marcus's voice was firm, an anchor in the storm of pain. Your body knows what to do, trust it. A noise outside drew his attention to the window. Dusk had fallen, and with it came the sound of movement in the underbrush, too deliberate for wildlife. They're back, Sarah whispered between contractions. Marcus moved swiftly to the window, peering out cautiously. A single lookout? He picked up his rifle, positioning it nearby but out of sight of the windows. Then he was back at Sarah's side, coaching her through another contraction, as if there had been no interruption. Deep breath. That's it. The contractions intensified further, now only a minute apart. Sarah cried out, unable to contain the sound. I need to push. Marcus examined her again. Not yet. Almost, but not yet. Breathe through the urge. The noise outside stopped abruptly. Marcus tensed, listening. They heard you. I can't be quiet, Sarah gasped as another contraction peaked. Don't try to be. He moved to position himself between the bed and the door, within reach of both Sarah and the weapon. Let them hear. It might even work in our favor. How? She managed to ask between breaths. Few things are more terrifying than a woman in labor, Marcus said, the faint smile returning to his face. Even hardened men tend to keep their distance. As if in answer, the footsteps outside retreated toward the tree line. Marcus nodded in satisfaction. See? Tactical advantage. Sarah might have laughed if another contraction hadn't seized her. This one was different. An undeniable, overwhelming urge to bear down. Marcus, she panted. It's time. He checked one more time, then nodded, all traces of humor gone. You're right. 10 centimeters. On the next one, you push. Outside, darkness was complete. The intruder had withdrawn. But Marcus knew they hadn't gone far. Inside, a new life was about to begin. Two forces, creation and threat, converged on this small cabin in the middle of nowhere. Ready? Marcus asked, positioning himself to guide the baby's arrival. Sarah nodded, gathering her strength as the next contraction began to swell. Push, he instructed calmly. Bring your child into the world. The sound of shattering glass broke the focused intensity of the room. Marcus whipped his head toward the back window, where a gloved hand was now reaching through a jagged hole, fumbling for the latch. Sarah, keep pushing, he ordered, his calm voice belying the urgency of his movements as he lunged toward the intruder. With remarkable upper body strength, Marcus launched himself from his chair, using the momentum to grab the extended arm and twist it sharply. A cry of pain came from outside as Marcus slammed the arm against the window frame, forcing the fingers to release a hunting knife that clattered to the floor. Sarah screamed with another contraction, her focus torn between the demands of her body and the struggle at the window. I'm right here, Marcus called to her, maintaining his grip on the intruder while reaching for the rifle with his free hand. Keep going. You're doing great. The intruder wrenched his arm free, disappearing from the broken window. Marcus quickly jammed a metal toolbox into the opening, then returned to Sarah's side, the rifle across his lap. That was impressive, Sarah panted between pushes. Combat training, he said. Upper body strength makes up for a lot. He repositioned himself to continue assisting with the birth, keeping a clear view of all points of entry. Focus on pushing now. Muffled voices murmured outside, several of them. The intruder hadn't come alone. How many? Sarah asked, gritting her teeth as another wave crested. 3, maybe 4. Marcus's voice remained steady. Don't worry about them. Hard not to, she managed, bearing down with the contraction. They're not getting in, he said, his certainty a comfort. Not while I'm here. The baby's head began to crown. I can see her, Marcus announced, his professional detachment momentarily broken by a sense of awe. One more big push,